Okay, so now I've got my UFO set up. I've got my dome and my windows layers pre-composed. I've got glows on them, so they're glowing, and I'm happy with that. If I go back to my original full resolution composite that has my background in it, I can actually start to animate my UFO into this composition now. Now, I named my composition. It's called UFO New. If I go to my composition menu, I can change it there if I want to. UFO New. So I'm going to go to the composition that has my background in it. And from my project window, here is the UFO New composition. I can see it there. It's a composition. It's got the name. I can see the preview thumbnail of it. This is my composition that has all my glows and all my layers set up. I'm going to drag and drop this composition on the top of my city background. Now, because I rendered my UFO almost full screen, we can see it looks really big in the shot there. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keyframe this UFO layer. There it is, spinning and doing its looping thing. And I'm just going to set some position and scale keyframes so that this layer comes in from out of shot, loops around the building, and then flies out of shot the other side. So, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set a couple of position keyframes, then I'm going to set some scale keyframes as well. So, what I want to do as well, I don't want to touch my background. I'm happy with my background, I want to leave it there, so I'm actually going to lock it. I'm going to turn on the lock. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this composition here, my UFO, and I'm going to move it off screen. Now I'm at frame 0 at the moment. I'm just going to click and drag this so that it's off screen. Now it is too big, so maybe actually before it goes off screen, maybe I'll just scale it down a little bit. So I'm just going to select my layer, my UFO layer, and hit S for scale. And I'm going to shrink it down to about 30% just for now. I'm going to change this later, but I just want to get this a little bit more manageable in my view so it's not dominating the whole picture. And I'm just going to drag it off the screen. I'm going to select my UFO layer that is off the screen and hit P for position, and I'm going to set a keyframe for it at this time. So I'm at frame 0, P for position, set a keyframe. Now I want my UFO to fly into shot, maybe take about 3 seconds to fly into shot. I want mine to fly behind this big skyscraper in the middle and then come back through into the foreground and then fly off. Now what I usually do when I'm animating is I don't worry too much about the timing. I just set the positions and the keyframes up. So frame 0, it's off the side of my image. I'm going to go forwards a few frames. A few seconds, maybe 4 seconds, and I'm going to drag my UFO in between my buildings here. I'm going to go forward another few seconds and drag it down a little bit into the foreground. I'm going to go forward a few more seconds and drag it off the side of the frame. So if I scrub through, I've got my UFO, it's flying into shot, flying around the buildings, flying out. Now obviously it's not going behind the buildings because this is just one layer sitting on top of the other layers. But the main thing is I've just got the basic movement of this done. One thing that's really important when you're doing animation is you've got to remember it's a process of refinement. Don't try and get all your timing and your keyframes exactly right from the start. Just get the rough motion in and then start refining it. Okay, so I've just got these positions and I'm pretty happy with that. Now at the moment my UFO is quite large if I look at it in comparison to my buildings, and also because the scale of this UFO doesn't change, it doesn't appear to be any further away or any closer throughout the animation. It's at the same point all the way through. It's the same size. So what I could do, if I wanted to give a sense of scale, is I could shrink my UFO down at the start So it looks small and then it increases in size once it's come round behind the building. So what I might do is hit S for scale, and I'm going to shrink my UFO down smaller. And I want it about, let's say about 8% for mine. I want it to be able to fit in between these buildings. So at this point in time, now I set my keyframe at 4 seconds. From here, as it comes forward, I'd expect it to get bigger. So I'm going to set a keyframe for the scale, and then as it comes forward to this point in time, which for me I'd set it, I think, frame at 8 seconds, I'm going to scale it up so it's bigger. Now I'm going to preview this. If I make this work area bar, if I make this shorter and just hit 0 on my keypad, After Effects will just draw a quick preview render of this sequence. Now the UFO is still not going behind the buildings because I haven't set up any masking for it. But now I can see the scale of this UFO is changing. It's getting bigger. It appears to be getting close to me. Now this is all just a trick because all I've done is I've rendered a 2-second loop from Cinema 4D. But in After Effects, I can change the scale, I can change the position, and I can make this thing fly around. The advantage of this is that we've only had to do a render of 2 seconds out of Cinema 4D, and Cinema 4D is really slow. So rather than having to render the entire thing in 3D and all this animation, all this process, we've just got a really quick to render sequence out of Cinema. Now obviously the timing, whoops, my timing's gone a little bit funny there. The timing of this is really rough still, and there's no masking. But now I've got a sequence of my UFO flying through the city. This sequence so far that I've previewed is 12 seconds. I've only had to render 2 seconds of 3D animation. Okay, now the last thing I want to do is I want to make my UFO go behind the buildings for the first section of my animation. So I'm going to do this in a really easy way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate my background, but I'm going to cut out the foreground parts of it. So I'm just going to unlock my background. I'm going to select it and hit Command D to duplicate it. Now I'm going to put this layer on top of my UFO, and I want to cut around the buildings so that I can see the UFO when it flies behind them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide all my other layers except for this new cityscape that's on the top. I'm going to grab my pen tool and I'm just going to quickly cut around these buildings that the UFO flies behind. Now I'm going to do this really roughly, but obviously you can do it a lot more tidily if you want to, and you can come back and refine this pen work later on if you want to. So I'm just cutting along the skyline with my pen tool. This is very rough. And I'm going to cut around my skyscraper. Now this big skyscraper in the middle, that's the last thing that flies around. So I'm just going to cut straight off the edge of that. I'm not going to worry about the other buildings to the side of it. And with my pen tool, I'm going to click all the way back to where I started. And I'm going to end up with a cutout of my image like this. Now you can use the pen tool in After Effects to cut this out. You can do the same thing in Photoshop. Because this is a still image, if you want to, you can cut this out in Photoshop instead. So now what we've got is we've got 2 versions of the same picture. We've got the full background image, and we've also got a cutout section that we sit over the top. Now the good thing is if I turn all my layers back on, my UFO now appears to go behind the buildings, but then I've got a problem. After it's gone between the buildings, it goes back behind them, when in fact I want it to come in front of this bunch of buildings. The simple way to fix this, now this is a really simple composite, so this doesn't work all the time, But a simple way to do this is to say that after 4 seconds, my UFO has travelled behind all the buildings it needs to travel behind. So this front layer, that only has to exist for the first 4 seconds. So what I'm going to do is just trim this down to 4 seconds. So after 4 seconds, this layer doesn't exist. So if we look at all these layers together now, the UFO is going behind the masked layer. After 4 seconds, that layer no longer exists. It stopped. So now my UFO is coming forwards over the top of the background. And if I hit 0 on my keypad, I can preview that. And I've created a little wee, sort of an optical illusion or a visual effect that looks a little complicated, but is actually pretty simple to set up. So the point of this is that you can take an image that's a background. Now this could be a movie file. Obviously it's more work if it's a movie file, but you can cut these out and you can arrange different masked layers for your UFO to fly through.